Yes, good morning everybody, and many thanks for joining us to the webinar IHM Documentation for Suppliers. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to our webinar, and my name is Henning Gramann. I'm the managing owner of GSR Services, and we are a specialized expert company for the compliance with these new regulations under the EU Ship Recycling Regulation and internationally under the Hong Kong Convention. So we have set up this webinar because we feel the need that there is some demand for further information and further clarification on this issue, which affects all the supply chains of the maritime industry, the ship owners, the shipyards, and also finally the ship recycling facilities. This is what the legislation is aiming for. So if you have any questions, please use the chat function, and if anything comes up, really, please don't hesitate to ask your questions because it's definitely helpful also for all the other viewers. So I am planning that this webinar will take a little bit less than 1 hour, and afterwards we have planned for up to half an hour for the Q&A session. So we have plenty of time to discuss all your individual questions, and I'm really happy to clarifying as much as possible. If this is not possible or you feel the need for further discussions, also afterwards, please don't hesitate to contact us. So what is this all about, the IHM documentation for suppliers? Who has to do what and especially how? This is what we try to explain a little bit more in detail. We have to start with the legal background, and that is affecting all ships above 500 gross tons, and they need to have a certified and maintained inventory of hazardous materials, IHM, Part 1. And that means it's documenting the hazardous materials in structure and equipment of ships. And that applies to those ships in case they are flying an EU flag, or they visit an EU port, and then it is independent of the flag the ship is flying. That means that around 2/3 of the global fleet is affected by this legislation. And it has entered into force end of last year. It has become effective. It's an important difference because the entry into force was already at the end of 2013. So 8 years ago nearly. It is not new. It's only new that it is followed and implemented in the maritime industry. But the regulation itself is quite old already. And this EU regulation is more or less a copy and paste of the Hong Kong Convention. There are 2 or 3 extra bits and pieces, which I will highlight a little bit later on. And therefore, once the Hong Kong Convention will enter into force, which will apply internationally, 2/3 of the global fleet will already be compliant automatically. So, as I said, the IHM Part 1 is documenting the hazardous materials and structure and equipment of ships. And this is based on documents from suppliers in case of new ships or also in case of IHM maintenance, because there the tier 1 suppliers, the direct trading partners of the shipyards and the ship owners, have to provide the documents for maintaining and developing the inventory of hazardous materials. In this case, and that's quite different to the existing ships, in this case there is no sampling and analysis allowed. It has to be done on hand of the documents, and this is where we will dig into today. What we need to make us aware of is the maintenance is tracking the changes of the hazardous materials in structure and equipment of ships. And a lot of different exclusions apply. And as I said, if an order item is not excluded or is falling into the scope of structure and equipment of ships, then the documents from suppliers become required. And this applies to the whole life cycle of a ship. So it's nothing which we need to do within a few months. No, this is something which we have to comply with for the many years to come. The maintenance process from the viewpoint of an owner, and this is directly affecting the supplying industry as well, is that the owner has to request documents from the suppliers in case of relevant order items. The documents received have to be reviewed whether or not they have been filled in properly, and if a hazardous material is declared to be present, it has to be tracked on board once it is stored, and especially, of course, when it is installed, relocated, or removed and disposed of. These changes have to be reflected in a copy of the certified IHM and an IHM maintenance report reflecting and explaining all the different issues which happened on board the ship has to be prepared and excuse me, at hand as well. These are the documents which will be checked by the port state control in EU ports. So it is a matter of the port state control inspections. And in addition to that, the IHM has to be recertified at least every 5 years, either by the classification society if they are acting as a recognized organization, or by the flag state itself. So that means the IHM, and especially the IHM maintenance, is under permanent control every now and then, and it has to be at hand 24/7 because shipping is happening 24/7, 365 days a year. So at any single point of time, when a ship visits an EU port, and in future any port around the globe when the Hong Kong Convention will enter into force, these documents have to be up to date, and not once a month or quarterly or half yearly, which some people do. This is not sufficient. The port state control wants to see the current status of the ship, and especially the hazardous materials, where they are and what changes have happened. Where you have requirements, there are always some penalties. So if an IHM is found to be incompliant, and that means the ship does not have any IHM, or it has not been certified or recertified, or the IHM basically is not reflecting the materials on board, even when it is certified, and we have seen quite a few of those, or it's not properly maintained, or there is no procedure for the maintenance, then it's an incompliance. And the penalties in France can be up to 100,000 euros or 1 year imprisonment. In UK and also in Norway, they speak about a financial penalty and or up to 2 years imprisonment. So this is not kindergarten. This is a very serious threat for ship owners. That means they are under a lot of pressure to get the documents from the suppliers. Otherwise, they will not be compliant and they risk these penalties. Plus, there are other scrutinies coming up, like from the cargo owner, like from the charterer, and so on and so on. So compliance in this regard for the owners is extremely important, and they are relying on the cooperation of the suppliers and preparedness of the suppliers. And basically, that's why we have this webinar today. Under the so-called REACH regulation, there are also fines for suppliers in case they provide information which is wrong or they provide it too late. And in EU, there is a new legislation under development because REACH is not 100% applying to the shipping industry, but a new legislation is under development which will have similar fines for any industry, including the maritime industry. So it will become even tougher also for suppliers. And then it is not only meeting the customer's demands, it is about legal compliance for suppliers and manufacturers as well. So what is the role of the supplier? Basically, the supplier has to provide two different documents. One is the so-called Supplier's Declaration of Conformity, SDOC, and that's a legal statement which overtakes responsibility for information in regards to the products and the hazardous materials contained or not contained in these products. And it is a company-specific declaration. So there is a malpractice around where many ship owners or their service suppliers require order, ship, or customer-specific documents. This is not required at all. It's a general statement or declaration from the supplier. You can prepare it once and use it for all different customers you have, any order which you receive, and so on. So this is the first step on how you can reduce your efforts and the time required for your documentation. The second one is the so-called material declaration, or MD. This is a product-specific document. It can also be a product group-specific document. For instance, if you have a huge variety of different O-rings and all O-rings are not containing any of these hazardous materials, then you can say, okay, all O-rings I am selling are covered by this material declaration. But what is also very important, as in many cases the forms are varying, in many cases these MDs are not signed, it always needs to have a reference to a valid supplier's declaration of conformity. It's a clear requirement, and if you, for instance, send us a material declaration without this reference, we can't accept it because of legal reasons. So these individual documents might be subject to control of the port state control as well. So they might look into that. Why is a new installation not reflected in the IHM? This can happen if the material declaration says none of the hazardous materials are contained in this product. Then that's all fine and very clear. So, but if the material declaration says yes, one or two of these hazardous materials are contained, the ship owner has to make sure that a related entry after installation of this item on board is made in the ship-specific IHM. I would like to have a closer look into the different forms which are required from the suppliers. So first of all, the supplier declaration of conformity. It has to be prepared by the so-called Tier 1 supplier. The Tier 1 supplier is the direct trading partner of ship owners or shipyards, not from the suppliers of this Tier 1 supplier, which means a Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4 supplier, for instance. No, the direct trading partner and contract partner, basically, is between the ship owner and the suppliers, the Tier 1 supplier. And it does not make any difference if the supplier is a trader or if the supplier is a manufacturer. They are, or they have to follow the same obligations. As I said, the SDOC is a legally relevant statement from the supplier, and it has to specify the applicable legislation. Then it is clear for the supplier, for the ship owner and shipyard, for the port state control, what is the legal basis under which these documents have been prepared and developed. If this is remaining unknown, it gives room for interpretation. And nobody needs this room. We have to be precise, also in legal terms. So that is very important. And as these legislations are not changing often, this document can be prepared once and used for many, many years. And for as many material declarations as you wish. So, of course, this declaration has to be valid as long as the product exists on board. Any minimization of this period is not allowed, like saying this declaration is only valid for 5 years. No, it's a clear legal requirement. As long as the product exists on board, this document has to be valid. That's very important as well. Before looking into the different parts of this SDOC and what needs to be filled in, I would like to show you a bad example which we have seen last week. This is a supplier's declaration of conformity sent by a supplier. So in the upper part, it talks about the objects of the declaration. Nothing is filled in there. At least something should be filled in, like all products delivered. Further above, the supplier is named. So if he says this applies to all products delivered, it's the right approach because it's not limiting the scope of the SDOC, and various MDs can be associated with it. And instead of telling the client or the customer which legislation has been followed, they make a reference to a test report from a laboratory, which has not even applied the right test methods or analysis methods as they are applicable to existing ships. Nevertheless, sampling and inspection is not the right approach for IHM maintenance or new build IHMs. So this is a document which is completely useless and absolutely not acceptable. But how can it be done better? Let's have a look at the upper part. First of all, the SDOC requires an ID number. As I said, all the material declarations have to reference this number because it's a double pack documentation which your customers need. You can choose whatever process you want to have for developing this ID number. In the guidance which we are providing you with on the landing page, in the upper part, there's a link to a manual. There are some ideas on how you can do it. It's not mandatory, it's your decision. All what we want to avoid that we receive 1600 SDOC with the ID number 001. So giving it a unique number is helpful also for you because it indicates when you have developed the SDOC, and if you have to prepare a new one, it comes with definitely with a different number. So the issuer's name and the issuer's address, I think that does not need any further explanation. This is the supplier, the tier 1 supplier. And then under the point 3, it specifies the coverage of the SDOC related to the products or the orders. So there are 3 options which we have integrated into our form. These are the 3 most common approaches. But the third option is definitely the one to be preferred. So if the SDOC covers only one order and only these specified products, you can decide to do so. It means next time you have to develop a new SDOC, so you have to spend more time for it. Or it can be used for all orders, but only for specific products. Following up on this, doing a proper document management makes this option very complicated, but in theory, this is an option which you can choose. But for sure, the best option is that this SDOC covers all MDs and all deliveries from this supplier. Only then you can develop it once and use it for a long period of time. Under number 4, it's a standard text. You can't even make an entry there. That's not important. And then we come to the legal requirements. If you download the forms which we are providing, of course you can still change them, but we have entered already the relevant legislations, so to make your life basically easier. So this is where we have the Hong Kong Convention. This is definitely a must-have because this will become internationally applicable. And the EU ship recycling regulation is also very good because all EU flagged ships need to make sure that they are in compliance with the EU SRR, EU ship recycling regulation. All the other entries which we have put in can be changed, but these 2 are really at least the ones which need to be listed. Otherwise, it's a very unclear document. Or let's say the legal background is not properly specified. Then under point 6, you can add additional information. Whatever you feel is necessary, you can put in there. I would say in 99% of all the forms which we are receiving, this part is left blank. There are no entries made. And then again, details about the issuer, the company name, place and date. It can be a third party. If a supplier or manufacturer decides to use a service supplier for taking care of this documentation, the service supplier should put in his details here. So in the end, name, function and signature of the responsible person for the development of this SDOC. That's it. It is not rocket science, it's not very complicated, and it's also not time consuming. So a proper SDOC, I think, can easily be done. How to fill it in, as I said, is also described in the manual which we are providing. We have to consider much more efforts for the product-specific material declarations. So the material declaration is product-specific, not customer, not order-specific. It is describing the presence or absence of hazardous materials in a product. And that's completely independent of who is buying this product. But it's always required in case of relevant order items. Even when no hazardous materials are contained in the product, this document still needs to be provided. And around 97 to 98% of all the material declarations which we get all are so-called zero declarations, saying none of these hazardous substances are contained above the threshold. I will explain the threshold a little bit later on. It has to have a reference to a valid SDOC, Supplier's Declaration of Conformity, as explained before. And it's very clear that suppliers depend on information from their own suppliers. And the same applies to manufacturers. They have their own supply chain. And you buy products, but you have no specific information in most cases on whether or not these 15 different hazardous materials are contained and in which concentrations. So we talk about a compliance data exchange. And this is what needs to be integrated in the maritime industry or implemented in the maritime industry these days, since, let's say nearly 1 year at least. This has been done in many other industries 10 or 20 or sometimes even 30 years ago. It is not new. The principles and the lessons learned from other industries is what we looked at, what we have integrated in the solution which we have developed, and it is not that complicated. Of course, in general, all what is managed here is, let's say, information which does not really add value in case of a manufacturer or a tradesperson or a retailer. But it adds value for handling these materials and products, and especially when it comes to waste management or ship recycling, this is truly valuable information. So we talk about a cradle-to-grave approach, and we need the data for ensuring a proper recycling in the end of a ship's life. And as such, this MD also has to be valid as long as the product exists on board. Again, no limitation to 5 years, 10 years whatsoever is legally possible or acceptable. We will also look into the details of this material declaration, but as before, one of the bad examples. This is an MD. I've shown you the SDOC, and this is the related MD. So the product name, in this case, as provided by the supplier, is a test report. A test report is not a product which is bought by a ship owner, not when it comes to structure and equipment of ships and new installations. And the test report number is here provided as the product number, and this test report is 10 square meters big. This is complete nonsense, and this makes it clear why the documents need to be checked which are provided by the suppliers before they are further processed and followed up on board, either during the new building stage or ship in operation for IHM maintenance. So, what are the hazardous materials we talk about? Basically, we have two tables. Table A, or this is how it is called under the Hong Kong Convention. The EU calls it Annex 1 substances. These are all substances which are already banned since many years in the shipping industry. The first one here, for instance, is asbestos. We all know that we find asbestos still on board brand new vessels, on board or inside brand new components and materials. And this is one of the huge risk issues which suppliers need to make sure. Get these documents. Use it as a verification that the item is asbestos free. And if your customer, the ship owner for instance, gets back to you and says, well, dear supplier number one, we have found asbestos in that, you need to have the backup information from your suppliers, which is saying there is no asbestos in this product. Because it's not only about establishing a chain of information, it's about establishing a chain of liability as well. Keep yourself safe by having backup information from your suppliers. Just a little story on the side. There is a service supplier from Scandinavia who takes complete orders and converts them into individual material declarations. The signature of the supplier is automatically copied in, and these documents are sent out to the customers. There is no backup information from the supply chain. The entire risk remains with the supplier, who is not a manufacturer, who is trading goods and products. This is a highly risky approach. It might satisfy the demand of the ship owner at this stage, but when it comes to the accuracy of these documents and with that the IHM of that particular ship, big and major questions come up, and if something is found out to be not okay, this ship supplier will have a very tough time. So it might seem to be very convenient now to work through the huge amount of documentation requests, but this is the worst thing you can do. There are other options also from other service suppliers where they say, for all these order items I need an MD, a material declaration. Click on this button and automatically all the zero declarations, all the material declarations saying none of the hazardous materials are contained is generated. It's the same approach like the one provided in Scandinavia, and it's far too risky, and this must not be used from my point of view, because doing it properly is not as cumbersome as it might seem in the beginning. I will talk about that a little bit later on. So, Table A substances are banned from shipping. Table B substances, or the EU talks about the Annex 2, but unfortunately EU Annex 2 means including Annex 1 substances, so this is very confusing. Let's talk about Table B substances as provided also in our forms. They are allowed. There is no ban on these hazardous substances, but they need to be documented when they are contained above the threshold value. So Table A banned, Table B allowed but to be documented. Let's have a look at the form step by step. In the upper part, you have to fill in the date. You should fill in a unique MD ID number. Same principle like for the SDOC number. You can add remarks or additional information if you feel the need. it's not always required. So leaving this field blank is absolutely fine. Number 4 means the issuer's details, so the tier 1 supplier, the supplier or the manufacturer, depending on who sells it to the ship. And the last line, the ID number of the related SDOC. If this is not correct or left blank, we are not able to accept the material declaration, even though it might have been properly developed. The SDOC is definitely a must-have. The part below is about the product, the name of the product, and the product or type number. It's not always required. You can also make a reference, or you can provide a number, a range of different numbers. Or you can say, like in the example I've mentioned before, all O-rings. Then you don't need to have a product number, because it's clear that all O-rings which you are selling are described in this material declaration. Then under 3 and 4, the quantity of the delivery. From my point of view, this is nonsense, because it's a product-specific declaration, and it makes no difference if this product is sold or delivered once, or if this product, 10 of these same products are delivered in this delivery. So we are always happy to see a 1, and the unit should be a logical unit. So if we buy an O-ring, we don't want to see square meters, cubic meters, kilograms whatsoever. Then the unit needs to be pieces. So there is a drop-down menu, and you can select it. And in number 6, the same unit should be provided as like selected on number 4. And here the arrow with the number 5, you can again add additional information. For instance, applies to serial number up to this, and then a different MD will be required for any identical product with a serial number higher than this number. But again, it's not required to be filled in here. So here in the first part, we have described who is the supplier and gave the document an ID number. Here we specify what is the product described in the tables below. And the tables below are listing the different hazardous substances and the related threshold level. On the next slide, I will explain the threshold level. If this substance is contained in a homogeneous material above this specified threshold level for this hazardous substance, then you have to tick the box and say, yes, it is contained above. And then you have to specify how much, which unit, and under number 4, where you can find it in the product. With this information, it's clear which part of the product, or the entire product, in case of let's say a paint, for instance, contains this hazardous substance. Again, here the example is table A. If you click one of the tick boxes, you definitely have a problem, because all these substances are banned since years. So what is this all about the different hazardous substances and the threshold and the keyword homogeneous material? Here, the example asbestos again, the threshold level is 0.1%. If the concentration is below, it is not a hazardous product, and you don't need to click the tick box. If it is above, despite the fact that it must not be contained at all, but let's say it is above, then you have to compare the threshold with the different homogeneous materials. This cable here, for instance, it contains 6 different homogeneous materials. The outside sheeting, the intervention paper, 3 different insulators, and the conductor, which is made of copper. Each of these different homogeneous materials needs to be compared with a threshold. What is the concentration of these substances in these different homogeneous materials? This is how detailed you have to investigate, or how detailed the information needs to be provided. But of course, as a supplier, or let's say as a manufacturer, you buy one of those cables from a supplier, and he has to give the MD for this full cable. And in case, let's say, the red insulator is containing cadmium above the specific threshold, he has to say, yes, cadmium is contained in this cable, in the red insulator, in this and that quantity. This is how the information has to be provided along the supply chain. When we go back to the different products, a supplier receives the order from his client or customer. And then, in case of a normal supplier, not a manufacturer, he requests the same information from his supplier, the Tier 2 supplier, and he provides the MD and SDOC. The Tier 1 supplier is using this information and puts this information into his own forms. And please don't forward the Tier 2 supplier documents, because your customer has not a contract with your supplier. Your customer has a contract with you, and you need to have the backup information. So once you have transferred the information into your own documents, then you can deliver the product and the documentation as well. This is a very, very simple process. It can be a little bit more complicated, or let's say the next process is closer to reality. Again, you have a client or the purchaser of your customer, and he sends a request to you, including an order. So if he sends a request for the MD and SDOC to you as a supplier, it is your right, and it should be your duty as well, to review whether or not the request is correct. I have some examples where you see that far too many requests are sent out. So if you don't agree that it's a valid request, we come to this a little bit later on, you can say, guys, this is not a relevant order item. Your request is denied for the documentation. But if it's a relevant one, you need to check whether or not you have the material declaration already at hand. If yes, great. You integrate the data from your in your own MD forms. So the MD in this case is available from your Tier 2 supplier, from your own supplier. And then you do the delivery, including SDOC and MD. If it is not available, you send the request to your supplier. You monitor what he is providing you with, and you do the review of the document. Maybe you have to remind him. This is very common. And if the review says these documents are not valid, there are some shortcomings, you should send it back to your supplier, and in best case also explain to him why you can't accept the document. So not just sending it back, but explain to him what is wrong from your point of view. So he can amend it and correct the information. Then you get it again. If the review is okay and says, yes, that's a valid document, you can integrate this again into your own forms and send it out to your customer. This is in case of a supplier, if you're trading the different products. In case of a manufacturer, you have to go along on hand of the parts list, and this is described here. You have various suppliers for different parts, coating, valve, a pump, an impeller, whatsoever. And in case these different parts are relevant, and I come to relevancy a little bit later on, this applies to the products ordered by ships or shipyards, but it also applies to the different parts of a product. So if it's a relevant part of your product, which you produce or manufacture, you need to get the same information from your suppliers. Of course, these suppliers are probably further away from the maritime industry, which means they need more support, more guidance, so that you get the information from them. That's basically the general setup. What we see today is unfortunately extremely unproductive or inefficient. There's a lot of confusion around, and either it's the IHM service supplier or the ship owner himself taking care of the IHM maintenance. A proper selection is not happening in many cases, which means too many requests are sent out and too many suppliers and manufacturers have to deal with that somehow. And the problem is that so many requests are sent out that nobody can concentrate anymore on the relevant items and on the relevant tasks. So we have compared one ship over a period of 1.5 years. For this ship, close to 4,000 or around 4,800 order items were ordered. One service supplier has sent out nearly 2,900 requests, or close to 60% of all order items. On average, for such a number of order items, for this ship type, for the same owner by the way, we would have sent out 228 requests. So on average, just below 5%. We are supporting the suppliers. We give guidance. They can have an email exchange. We have a chat function in the tool we are using. They can call us. This is not the case for the other one. And the other one, who has sent nearly 2,900 requests, only collected 36 material declarations. And as he had sent out so many unnecessary requests, only 4 of these 36 were relevant. Due to the support which we are offering, we on average get 226 out of 228 documents. If you bring this down to the IHM compliance level, the one who's doing the mass mailing without proper selection is even below 2%. And we are absolutely on the other side of that scale. So we need to look at quality, not quantity. That's a key issue. That's, let's say, doing a comparison from the viewpoint of a ship owner. If we do this from a viewpoint of a supplier, the consequence is, of course, these many requests, they have to be handled. Either they are denied or they have follow-up. So that generates costs. And if this supplier forwards the request to his suppliers, the whole supply chain is struggling and spending far too much time and cost on the documentation, which is not required. So efficient compliance becomes impossible. And therefore, the MDs become unavailable. This cake diagram shows a request for 250 items to one supplier. And only 2 items were relevant if you perform a proper review. If you do a quick review, we could have said, okay, let's say around 40 would be required. But that means at least 210 requests were sent out without any reason, without any demand. And this is showing the significance of the problem. Last week, I was working for a supplier from Germany. He had around 200 requests received from 2 different service suppliers and 1 separate ship owner. I have reviewed it and not a single request was necessary, not a single one. So this really shows the significance of how important it is to carefully select the order items. And I will talk about that on one of the next slides. So that's the consequence for the supplier. A huge workload without any necessity and costing money and causing frustration. For the owners, it's also counterproductive because in the IHM maintenance report, you have to show for which items you have requested the documents and for which ones you have received it. So if I send out too many requests which remain unfulfilled, because it's impossible to fulfill these requests, I am documenting gaps. And how much easier can the life of the port state control become than when I present to them black on white, see, I have 80% gaps or 90% gaps. Then the PSC easily says, okay, your IHM maintenance does not work. And now we talk about non-compliance. The penalties I have presented before. Also, if the crew has to track order items on board more than what is really required. So then they start tracking some normal consumables, for instance, which is not in the scope of IHM Part 1 maintenance. And they spend more time. They have so many other things to do, but it just creates more and more efforts. And this is not necessary. So what is extremely important is to have an efficient IHM compliance for the shipyard, for the ship owner, and for all the suppliers and manufacturers. Most people really, and this is a key aspect, most people, and especially most suppliers, look at the relevancy of the order items. This is the right step. But if you see the overall effort, this is a fraction of the whole follow-up part. So the blue parts here are the categorization of order items. That's less than 10% of the time required, but it requires a lot of knowledge, detailed knowledge. Sending out the request, if you do it manually, takes a lot of time as well. You have to do the monitoring. So which supplier has replied? Then you have to do the document review. Check each and every document. Has it been properly filled in? Is it clear which item it's describing? And do all the contents make sense? And then creating and updating own documents. And this is no issue if you are a supplier and you update your own documents, or if you're a ship owner and you update the documents. But a lot of these processes can be automated. We use, for instance, the system from Nautilus Log. The categorization is done more or less, or to a big extent, automatically. We have clear rules in the system. We have a fully reviewed impact catalog in the system, and so on and so on. So all what can be automatically categorized is done by the software which we are using. Of course, it's not covering 100%. For anything which is not automatically categorized, we have to do it manually, but it becomes better and better. The request emails are sent out automatically, and we have a full overview of who has replied, which documents are there. We do the review, which again takes a lot of time. We have some suppliers where we tell them 10 times, this is wrong in your document. We can't accept it. Please change it. Please change it in this way or in that way. We give guidance. What is extremely frustrating for us, and also eating up the time on the supplier side, is when he keeps sending the same document 10 times. It doesn't help. We are still not accepting it, even if it's sent the 11th time. So we try to give some indications of what needs to be corrected, but it's required that people listen to it. Again, these are not regulations which we have developed or our clients, ship owners, manufacturers, suppliers. These are rules and regulations done by legislators. We only try to fulfill it as efficiently as possible. So, if you do it manually, you will need much more manpower. That's 100% sure. So, the careful selection is extremely important. For a fleet in service, we roughly categorize 5% of all order items to be relevant. So the 4.7 in the numbers I provided to you a little bit earlier. It's a key to efficiency because any unnecessary request which is sent out creates workload, and this can be avoided. So, but that requires that we are reviewing each product or order item and evaluate whether or not it's inside the scope of the IHM Part 1, belongings to structure and equipment of a ship, which is fixed, so welded, bolted, or otherwise permanently fixed to the ship. The loose items are not relevant for IHM maintenance and therefore don't require an MD. If you flip a ship upside down, anything what falls out is outside of the scope, first of all. But there are other exclusions. They are listed here. So metal and metal alloys, for instance. Ball bearings. I had a long discussion with other service suppliers who requested the MD for those. And I explained again and again and again, and it was not a new installation, it was a replacement for an already installed part. I said, it's so far outside of the scope of IHM maintenance, so please stop bothering the supplier we are representing here. Please take care of the truly relevant items. End of the story was that this service supplier reported the supplier back to the ship owner as a non-cooperative supplier. And our client, the supplier, approached the purchaser from the ship owner and explained what happened. And the purchaser was really confused about the behavior of the IHM maintenance service supplier. But it happens very, very often in most cases. Why? Either these service suppliers don't have the required knowledge, even though they have nice and fancy brochures whatsoever, or they simply avoid their responsibilities for the services they are providing. When we say an order item is not relevant and it becomes an issue during a PSC inspection, it's our responsibility. So we need to clarify with the port state control why we decided it's not inside the scope of IHM maintenance. So if this is avoided, I can lower my prices, of course, significantly. So that's one of the aspects, but it creates so much more cost on the other sides. So it's counterproductive in the end. As you might know, or as you know, I guess, we are providing the landing page with a guidance. It's extremely important. Please read it. We have compiled valuable information. Instead of reading through 40 pages of legal text and technical guidelines, we have summarized all of that in the guidance and how you can do it. We provide the forms in case you don't have them already. So the landing page provides you with a full overview on the open requests. You can use the drag and drop function. You can even specify when you upload the MDs how long we can reuse it for other similar order items. Up to 3 years, this is a barrier or a limit which we have set. So, but if you say this product is not changing, it has not changed over many years, it will not change, so you can reuse this material declaration for this product for a period of 3 years. If the same article or the same product is ordered from you, we will not request the document for it. It will automatically be reused as it is in the system already available and has been released for this period of time by you. So we do the review and we offer support, for instance, when we say, sorry, this product is not okay, or this document, sorry. For you, your actions means if you receive requests, and that includes us, sometimes, or we work on hand of the order data shared by our clients. It doesn't matter if our client is a manufacturer, is a supplier, or a ship owner. We work on hand of the order data and how they describe a product. Not 100% of our requests are correct, but that depends on the order text. So in most cases, I think they are, and the vast majority is, but very few might cause a request by email to suppliers, and if the supplier tells us then, sorry guys, this is this or that, or it's just a service, say, okay, sorry for bothering you, we will change the status of this order item and you will not receive a request for this anymore. In case of other service suppliers, really do the check. As I said last week, 200 order items, not a single one was required, but the service suppliers wanted to have all of them. So develop your own approach, your strategy, your process on how you want to handle it. Also in regards to your own suppliers and your customers. Who is responsible in-house? What are your requirements? And also what are your terms and conditions? Put the MD and SDOC issue into your terms and conditions, and you can also relate it to the payment terms. If it's a relevant order item, the documentation makes the order or the delivery complete or incomplete. And I'm sure you have some clauses about incomplete orders. Include the documentation in that in case you request it. All of a sudden, for your suppliers, there is a value behind the documentation. It's not just like two pieces of paper they have to attach somehow without any consequence if they don't. This will increase the inflow of the documents from your supply chain for sure. As I said, please read our guidance. Really, we have spent a lot of time to develop it. We also have added frequently asked questions at the end of the document and typical mistakes. Read through, learn from that, and simply make sure that we don't have to reject your documents or others have to reject your documents. If there are other questions, please, anytime, ask us by email, by phone, whatever channel you choose. We are always happy to help and clarify these things. So, the conclusion. 2/3 of the global fleet needs these documents. It's not a small fraction of the maritime clients you have. It's the majority, and it will grow. And all the requests which you see today does not mean that they are representing 2/3 of the global fleet. There are still a lot of owners out there who have not realized that they are incompliant with these IHM requirements. Those who have, and maybe have also involved a service supplier, overdo these things. It's a serious legal requirement for all. So, and also working hand in hand is very important for the whole industry. And that really means closing the circle. Manufacturer, supplier, shipyard, ship owner, and finally the recycler. And with that, I would like to open the question and answer session. And I saw that there were a few questions and I tried to pick them up. I just received a note here that my connection seems to be unstable. I hope it's not affecting you at the moment. So I start from the beginning. There's one question. Is re-attendance and sampling required for recertification, or will this be a paper exercise? There is no sampling, no inspection by what we call an IHM expert required, or even planned for the recertification. The initial IHM is certified, and in most cases for existing ships, these IHMs have been developed on hand of ship inspection, sampling, and then reporting. This is the foundation for the IHM maintenance after the initial certification. So let's say we close the initial IHM And on top of that, we put other layers which are called maintenance. So the initial IHM will not be re-evaluated during recertification. Recertification will focus on the maintenance. So, and there is one, let's say, voluntary suggestion in the EMSA best practice guidance on IHM. And that says that either suppliers or manufacturers, but also ship owners, could do a random sampling based on risk categories for delivered items. I've never seen that this was done, and I don't think that this is necessary, because the documentation scheme which is now to be established is so-called a self-declaration system, as like under ROHS for the electronics industry, REACH, and so on. There is no independent certifier or verifier in between. It's a supplier who declares by himself what the characteristics of the product are. If this is found to be inaccurate or wrong, the penalties for the supplier will be more severe than compared to other schemes where there is an independent verifier in between. Then they share the responsibilities. So the penalties can be very severe, and it's a self-declaration like what we have on electronics, the CE marking. Nobody checks if the CE marking has been rightly printed on the electronics. But if it's found that this product is in contradiction with the CE requirements, or the ROHS basically, the penalty for the manufacturer or the importer in Europe will be very, very severe. And the same principles apply here as well. So, then for how long can the same documents after preparation be used? This evaluation basically depends on the supplier. If he's changing his suppliers, or if his supplier is only issuing the document for one delivery of, let's say, 10 pieces, and then he orders the same product 5 times, but the documentation has been provided earlier only for the previous 10 products delivered, then this can't be reused. So he needs to get a new MD. Or what can be put into the terms and conditions, for instance, saying that the supplier has to make sure that valid information is provided and at hand of this customer. Which means if the same item is ordered again, the supplier has to check whether or not he has provided the right information before, or if there are any changes, and then without being requested to do so, he has to provide the document even without being asked for. So, but how long these documents can be reused really depends on the information contained in the material declaration in this case, or during uploading. So there is no limitation, and we must not mix up the reuse period with the validity period. The validity has to be, or has to remain, unlimited as long as the product exists on board. The reuse of the same document is a completely different aspect. So then we have a question: how can we comply this SDOC if we are not familiar with the written standards? Very simple. You have to be familiar with these standards. We are or have summarized the key aspects in our manual. If you want to see the whole text, in the SDOC all the documents are clearly specified and listed. You can Google for them, you can find the original documents, you can read through and take out the parts which are relevant for you. Not knowing does not mean that you don't have to comply with it. So if you're not familiar, but your customers demand it, make yourself familiar. Do a self-study. We also offer trainings on really delivering the parts of the legislation, how to implement and follow up on that in your real life, I would say. Without, well, the Hong Kong Convention has around 40 pages. The IHM guidelines have 40 pages. The EU Ship Recycling Regulation is even longer. The EMSA Best Practice Guidance has 60 pages. So it's a lot of work. If you can't fall asleep, take one of those, let's say, booklets, and you can sleep within 5 minutes. Just joking, but really you have to know the legal background for the market you are in. And that does not only apply to the shipping market, it applies to any supplier in any market. So then, hi Henning, problem is that IHM is a purely European Union-led exercise. Suppliers, manufacturers and distributors outside of the EU are under no legal obligation to produce any information regarding DG content of materials other than the local requirements. That's partly right. In the US, we see that a lot of suppliers say, okay, if you want to have a material declaration, I tell you that this product is not available. I'm not selling it to you. Combining this with the huge amount of unnecessary requests means it's a huge loss of income or turnover for these suppliers, because they instantly react like that and don't even check whether or not these requests are for relevant items. That's on one side. But if I buy products from a supplier, from a trader, I enter into a contract. And in my contract, we also have terms and conditions, or we can have special agreements and say, okay, when I buy this from you, this or that becomes part of the delivery as well. In case here of the IHM maintenance, it is the MD and SDOC. And any supplier who is delivering to, let's say, the big ship owners or big shipyards is already aware of these requirements. So, and if they are only trading locally, and the ships are also only in the local traffic or trading schemes, they might not be affected by the EU. So that applies to 1/3 of the global fleet. But the majority, as I said, is affected and has to comply. And if a supplier can't do it or is not willing to do it, often it's really about the willingness and spending a little bit of time to look into it, or spending a little bit of money to get it done. If he's not willing to do that, okay, then you have to look for a different supplier, because the risk of incompliance are far too high. So how are ship suppliers outside the EU supposed to retrieve the required info from their suppliers if they do not have it? As I said earlier, the suppliers, and it's not specific to the maritime industry. It has been done by many other industries over far more than 10 years ago. So if a supplier is not only delivering to the maritime industry, but to medical technology, to the automotive industry, and so on and so on, he is familiar with that. And for instance, in the medical and automotive industry, the requirements are much more comprehensive and much more strict. So that means in-house, he might have, or he should or must have the information at hand already. He only has to select the right information, put this into these forms, or within the supply chains, there is more freedom or more variation possible with regards to how the information is transmitted and provided. He can provide you with a full substance overview as required in the automotive industry, hand it over to you and say, pick whatever you need. And then it's your task to take out the information for cadmium, lead, and so on and so on. So information in many cases is there, and we have synergies also with the electronics industry. And on the one slide, and you will get the recordings of this webinar later on. On one slide, there is a list of the exclusions. Read through. That directly impacts the relevancy of order items and the request which you receive. And it directly impacts on the information which you need to get from your own supply chain. So that means the effort can be reduced drastically if you fully digest and understand these exclusions. That's the key for compliance. Sending out mass emails, mass requests is the worst thing you can do, because you will not be able to have a clear picture of what is lacking and what you have got already. So let me be clear, it's not about ship suppliers not wanting to provide the IHM document. It is a matter of ship suppliers not being able to. Yes, I agree, many ship suppliers are struggling quite a lot. We are doing this for ship suppliers as well. And our experience is that the information is provided much more often, or in a much higher percentage, if the right guidance is provided. And for us, it does not matter if we work on behalf of a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 supplier. It's about educating the person you need some information from, supporting him, giving them a call, and that really makes a huge difference. It is a nice dream to have 100% coverage. We are not there. I'm hesitating to say not yet. I'm not sure if we will ever get there. But getting as close to 100% as possible can be done, and this is the goal. Again, in the comparison of the compliance level achieved for the IHM maintenance, we are quite close there. And that's because the ship owner is also getting in touch with the suppliers. We have independent video calls with the suppliers. We talk about their individual difficulties. We show them what can be done, how can we solve the problems, and how we are supporting them and also their supply chain. And this is really the key to success. So getting into it and not receiving a request, reading through and saying, no, I can't. Sorry, customer, you will not get it. So looking a little bit beyond that really opens many, many doors. And there is much more which can be done compared to what is done in these days. So what are the consequences for not having these documents for me as a tier 1 supplier? Yeah, as a tier 1 supplier, as I just said, you have a little bit more flexibility. First of all, you can carry out a risk assessment. How likely is it that this item contains a hazardous substance? If you say, oh, I'm very sure it does not contain anything, you can refrain from asking your own suppliers and spending time on that. But the risk is with you. It's your estimation. And it's not the estimate from your customer. It's not the estimate from your supplier. You can shift this risk and the liability by requesting the documents. If you still don't get it, there are other options. We call this, for instance, the inspection-based material declaration. But that only makes sense for high valuable products or for very simple products. If you sell, let's say, gasket sheets, these 1 or 2 square meter gasket sheets, which you find on board any ship. If you sell them very frequently and you're not getting the documents from the supplier, nibble off a small corner, send it to a lab. It does not even cost $50, and get a lab report about, does it contain asbestos or not? And these gasket sheets are really the highest risk materials which we find on board, and where we have most often found asbestos on board. We have inspected far more than 600 ships, and more than 50% of these ships, this is where we found asbestos, even though asbestos for these ships, due to their age, was already banned. So it's a significant problem. And if you think about the consequences, the ship owner buys a sheet of the gasket material. He has it on board for a certain period of time. The engineers are cutting out the gaskets and install them all around the ship. If you then identify, oh, it's containing asbestos, then the flag might say to the ship owner, okay, dear ship owner, you have to take it out within 3 years because you have now identified an illegal installation of asbestos. That's one side of the law. There are other options, but I don't want to make it even more complicated. But that means the supplier who has said this is asbestos free has to cover all the costs. An unknown number of piping systems have to be dismantled. An unknown number of flanges. The ship will be in dry dock, and so on and so on. So selling such a gasket sheet for, I don't know, 50, 100 bucks can create a risk of millions. Therefore, minimize the risk. Create the chain of liability. Get the information from your suppliers. I know it's only a bad scenario, but this is as it is. And for avoiding these risks, I hope you are more motivated to get to or to approach your suppliers and ask for the information. And make clear, and that's one of the key aspects as well, with regards to the SDOC. The legal background is specified. What are the legal requirements? And there it is clear, asbestos means 6 different types of asbestos. It's all clear in the regulation with a threshold of 0.1%. In China, not all 6 types are falling under the asbestos ban, only 5. Which means the 6th type, which is called chrysotile, that's the type of asbestos which is most oftenly used, also sometimes in very high concentrations. Under Chinese legislation, this is asbestos-free. For the international shipping market, under SOLAS and under the Hong Kong Convention, it is not asbestos-free. So, if you become aware of this fact, also in the US, you can still buy brand new asbestos-containing products if they were in the market in the mid-1990s already. Gasket sheets have not changed so much over the years. So, and they don't even require a labeling. If you get a clear statement in form of properly filled in SDOCs and MDs, or a different statement, but that is something you need to evaluate then you can or you will get somebody who has to take care of the consequences, and not you as a trader who can't know all the details on the substances contained. So, what are the risks to provide MD as a general document by using the statement all products for the suppliers? Yeah. Sometimes it seems to be a very convenient option to say, okay, this MD, which should be a product-specific document, I just say, okay, all my catalog items are covered by this MD because nothing is in there. Okay, you can do that, but specify the catalog items. Because if your catalog changes in 2 months and you add 5 or 10 other items, they are not covered at the time when you have issued and sent out this document. So it needs to be clear and precise. And on the other side, for you, it makes life easy. For your customers, for the ship owners, this is blank horror. How do you want to relate one statement to such a huge variety? It can be done. From the data management point of view, it's a little bit tricky. But it does not relieve you from the burden and from the liability issue. So if you're 100% sure, fine. But if you're not 100% sure, better refrain from selling this item, because the consequences really can be too severe. So then we have, all parts have been manufactured asbestos-free since 2006. Oh yeah, I've seen this before as well. Can we share this declaration? Forget about this declaration. All ships delivered since, I would say, 20 years, in many cases even more, come with an asbestos-free declaration. We are not looking at it at all because it's of no value. And under SOLAS, this is very important related to the risk of suppliers. Till 2015, SOLAS had no threshold for asbestos, which means any material, no matter how big, if one asbestos fiber is contained in this product, it is asbestos containing. But on the shore side, in most countries, we had already a threshold level of 0.1%, which means I buy a material in France, Germany, or wherever, and it's under local legislation asbestos-free, which means it's below 0.1% asbestos content. I put this on a ship, and SOLAS did not specify it. It said, so any occurrence of asbestos is an asbestos-containing material. All of a sudden, the ship does not comply with SOLAS anymore. This is really serious for the ship. Which means an asbestos-free declaration in most cases says it's 100% free of asbestos. I would never, ever issue such a document. Always specify the threshold, and that exists under SOLAS since 2015, once the threshold was put into the Hong Kong Convention or IHM guidelines. So insist of properly filled in material declarations, because asbestos is only 1 out of 15 substances to be recorded. So if you get an asbestos-free declaration, according to whatever standards or understanding or national legislation, still 14 are missing. So it does not really help further. So it's a nice to have, but asbestos-free statements from my point of view are outdated due to the proper MD management which is now required. So there's a question. Yeah, the webinar will be recorded, and the recordings will be sent out, I think, 3 hours after the webinar automatically by email. So then I do not think there exists a legal framework by which a supplier outside the EU can be held liable for consequences arising from an incorrectly issued IHM declaration if it is done without malicious intent. Yes, to a certain extent you're right. Interestingly, so if we think about the European market, if it's not the manufacturer, it's at least the importer into the European market who is the liable person. In addition, in other countries, they also started to have similar legislation. And the key is, if a supplier is filling in these documents as per the internationally applicable Hong Kong Convention, and it will enter into force into the coming years, but if he is already making today a statement according to these clear requirements, he provides, let's say, a technical documentation. As a manufacturer, if you deliver a pump, or as a supplier, if you deliver a pump with certain technical characteristics, so many liters per second, per minute, whatsoever, and this pump is not bringing these specifications, your customer will not be happy. And the same applies to data or information related to the hazardous material contained. So it's the same, it's a technical documentation. And if you make this mandatory to be delivered with a product, it's a one-on-one requirement which you have to fulfill, or which you have to control if your supplier is delivering it. So it's a lot of effort, and I know that nobody is happy about it. And I am only the postman delivering the bad news. But there are ways to increase the likeliness that you will get the information. And that's based on cooperation, not pressure. So cooperate, help them, because your suppliers want to sell their products. And if they see that it's not only one customer, but more and more customers require these documents, they get under pressure and they have to look into it and they have to solve the problem. So if they can't solve the problem, it's clear that this will create a loss for them. So how can we align with GSR for the IHM documentation point of view, and what would be the long-run advantages for a supplier? Yeah, the first advantage from my point of view is we are carefully selecting the order items. So we are not doing the mass mailing, and we are not simply throwing tasks on the suppliers. We carefully select it. The second part is the landing page makes it easier to provide the documents. We also do the review. Basically, the review means it's a compliance check of the documents provided. And we give feedback if it is not fully compliant. This is on behalf of our own clients, but this also helps the supplier to provide proper documents also to the other customers. So that's one of the other advantages. So, and with the upload function on the landing page, where they can specify that up to 3 years this document or these documents can be reused, it really avoids future requests and future work. So over the time, the more and more this, let's say, our archives are filled, the less requests will be sent out. And soon the landing page will be upgraded. They can do a proper data management in their own landing page, which is completely free of charge. That applies to all suppliers, to the ship owners, and all suppliers to our clients. So no matter which, let's say, tier status they have in the supply chain. So this is basically how we try to make the life of suppliers easier. And in case of manufacturers, we look into the parts list, which all the different parts they use for manufacturing a product, a component. And on that level, we are evaluating the relevancy as well. So for a simple product evaluation we recently did, 17 different parts were ordered from suppliers, but only 3 of them were relevant. But the finished product is relevant for the IHM development for new ships and IHM maintenance for existing ships. So, but for only needing to follow up on 3 out of 17 different parts, this is really showing how you can create efficient data management and remaining or staying fully compliant with the requirements. So I think we still have 2 minutes short, but I think every one of us is quite busy. I would like to thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me. I hope it was not too boring. I hope I was able to give some good ideas. If there are questions, here are our contact details, really. Anytime, please get in touch with us. We get in touch with you because of our customers or our clients, and it's our responsibility to get as many accurate documents from the suppliers of our clients as possible. This is why we have this webinar here today, and we are more than happy to provide more guidance to increase availability and quality of the documents. So, thank you very much. If you want to listen to me again, this afternoon is another webinar, then in German language, but I'm sure you have enough of me. You will get the video. please feel free to get in touch with us. We're more than happy to help. And I would like to thank you and wish you a wonderful evening, afternoon, morning, whatsoever. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.